Right, if I could have the next slide, please, Helen. So it's just a very brief bit of housekeeping. So we will be asking you to stay on mute while the presentation is taking place. Do use the chat function if you want to add any questions. We'll be going through those at the relevant times. We may ask you during the Q&A session if you want to unmute to join in and ask your question, but please don't feel that you have to. You can stay on mute and we'll just read that out on your behalf. It's not school, so you can nip out to the toilet at any time you want to. Make sure you've got a drink to hand. Do take notes, and if you complete our survey at the end, we'll be sending out a copy of the slides afterwards. So I can't stress that if you complete the survey, then we'll be able to collect your email address, make sure you've got the right one, because I know a number of people are booked on by colleagues and so on. So if you complete the survey, you'll be guaranteed to get a copy of the slides and resources afterwards. Thank you, Helen.
Sorry, there seems to be some sort of delay.
Yeah, don't worry, it's fine.
It's not moving across.
I'll just give it a minute. So, for those of you that don't know, I'm Michelle Saunders. I'm the Workplace Health Project Officer at Medway Council, and I lead on the Workplace Health Programme in Medway and Swale. Also joined on the call today by the other coordinators. So Helen covers West Kent, Catherine covers East Kent, and Rat covers Dartford, Gravesham and Swanley, and Justine is our very able project assistant. So we'll be here to answer your questions and help during the session. I'm going to hand over now to Steve, who is from the Time to Change London Network, and he's going to take us through some tips on engaging men in the workplace for Men's Health Week. Thank you, Steve.
All right, thanks, Michelle. And I think we've been talking about this for months, either through lockdown and trips to up the castle and walks and things like that. So I'm really delighted to come along and present, hopefully with something that will be useful for everyone today, and also for Kent and Medway Healthy Workplaces. And I know you're doing an amazing job, because I was involved. I went on your Connect 4 training. I think James mentioned it was 18 months ago at the Innovation Centre, and I got a lot from that. And I also found out a lot more about what you're doing with the awards, etc. So, you know, thank you very, very much for inviting me today. So I'll move on with the presentation. That picture there is me looking like something out of a Littlewoods catalogue, for anyone that remembers those going back. I'm next to Rochester Castle. As Michelle mentioned, my name's Steve Loft. I'm 58 years old, I nearly forgot that. I'm a father I've got a son. So men's stuff, we're quite a male-dominated household in Walderslade, where I live. And I now am setting up what's called the Time to Change London Network. And I'll explain a little bit about, you know, my background in a minute and why I'm qualified to talk about this. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Helen, that'd be great.
I'm not sure why there's a huge delay. It wasn't earlier, was it? So
don't worry, Helen, it's the beauty of Zoom. I'm sure I'll get there in a second.
Yeah.
Probably raced right to the end now. Just not liking it. Right.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. Yeah, so just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about me and what makes me qualified to sort of present this subject matter. We're also going to put into context men's health and look at some statistics and research, current research and statistics around men's health. And then I'm going to give you a few tips on engaging men around their well-being. And this again has been drawn from research. And then I thought I'd like to share with you, putting into context this research in some real examples of where I've gone to workplaces and talked about well-being and how we've engaged with men. And I thought hopefully you'll find these case studies really useful. And then finally, Justine's going to go through some signposting that's available to you. Before I start, I wanted to say that I'm not expecting any triggers today, because sometimes when you deal with well-being, particularly mental well-being, it can have an impact on people emotionally. I'm not expecting that, but if you do find that happens, then please take yourself away. That's not a problem at all. And you know, your self-care is more important to me than anything. So yeah, if we can move on, please, Helen.
Sorry, it's just not working. It's not
You got, if you put the arrow in the bottom corner of the slide, there's a little buttons sometimes appear, and you can press, no, the left-hand side, sorry. Yeah, there. If you click, no, yeah, click the other way. They're the ones that will help you. That's it. Now another one.
That seems to be working.
There we are. That's right. There we go. Thanks very much. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
So a little bit about my background. So what am I talking about health? Well, I originally was an accountant, and I started working for the NHS when I was 18 as a trainee. I qualified as an accountant in my late 20s, and I've worked for organisations across Kent. So I'm sort of a Kent lad. Worked for KCC, Kent Police, and then I eventually in 2002 went to work to London for the first time. And I worked for an organisation you might have heard of called Transport for London, 24,000 staff, a very big enterprise indeed. And I really enjoyed my time there. I worked as an accountant, then moved on to become a quality manager. And then in 2012, which was Olympic year, I found myself in, I was struggling emotionally. And eventually I what probably some people would describe as a nervous breakdown. I was eventually diagnosed with a condition called generalized anxiety disorder. And I was off work for about 8 months. And that when I came back, I realized that perhaps there needed to be a bit more support for people that had gone off work with mental health challenges. And I set up a peer support group. And from there, I sort of got asked, because the peer support group was really successful, to do some talks for Time to Change, which was then a social movement around breaking the stigma and discrimination around mental health. And the workplace team got hold of me and asked me to do some training, deliver some talks like this. And in 2017, I took a severance from Transport for London, and I decided to go into training and Time to Change. For a year and a half, I volunteered with them as a workplace mental wellbeing and mental health awareness trainer for Time to Change champions, which some of you in organisations may remember or may have signed a charter, which is very similar to the Medway Healthy Workplaces scheme. At the same time, I trained as a counsellor. I did three and a half years training as a counsellor, but then decided that I wanted to continue on with the training. And I set up my own company, which Michelle mentioned, called Wellment, in 2017 after I left work. And from there, I ran that for a couple of years. And in March, I decided to hand that over to a couple of people to do more volunteer work. And now I do sort of three main things. I'm a public speaker for an organisation called the Speakers Collective, which is a group of speakers who talk around all sorts of social issues, current social issues. And I do public speaking for them. I also volunteer for an organisation called Action for Happiness, and I run a group in Medway as a co-leader. That's an online group, and that's around positive psychology. And as mentioned on my first slide, that I'm now setting up a network in London, because Time to Change, as again, some of you may be aware, finished at the end of March because government funding stopped. So we are continuing on in London as a network to continue the good work that Time to Change done, to try and set up hopefully a social enterprise around that. So that's my background. So my main background in terms of men's health was met with mental health and well-being. And probably it could be argued that mental health and well-being is probably the one that men don't tend to talk about as much as anything around their health. But so it was really tough, particularly in my experiences in the workplace. Or first of all, myself and my own experience of not opening up about what was going on for me and my health, but also seeing around me, particularly in sort of organisations where there's predominantly men, seeing that same thing happen and hearing people going off work and you know, not knowing the reasons why. So could we move on to the next slide, please, Helen? That's great. That's it. Great. Thanks. So let's start with a little bit of context to men's health. And this is a lovely graphic that the Men's Health Forum has produced. And it's the scale of the challenge around men's health. So let's run through these statistics. First of all, 1 man in 5 dies before the age of 65. So that's 20% of men die before the age of 65. 75% of premature deaths from heart disease are male. 67% of men are overweight or obese. Middle-aged men are twice as likely to have diabetes as women. And 4 out of 5 suicides are male. And men are more likely to smoke or smoke more, eat too much salt and red meat, eat too little fruit and vegetables, drink to dangerous levels, and men are twice as likely to have liver disease. And more recently, there's been a statistic that's come out that men are considerably more likely to die from COVID-19 than women, twice as likely according to age standardized figures. So these are quite startling figures around men's health and in comparing them with women. If we can go over to the next slide, please, Helen, we'll move on. So what are the sort of causes? And research suggests these are some of the main causes, and I'm sure there's other research papers that will give you extra ones, but these are the ones that I found that were common across researches. First of all, unhealthy behaviours. So we've seen in the previous slide that things like poor diet, inactivity, smoking and excessive alcohol consumption has a massive impact on their health. And you know, a lot of the public health organisations that, you know, are doing a lot of great work to try and overcome these behaviours. A lack of awareness on health risks posed by their lifestyle. So there's an educational piece here around men and their lack of awareness of what their risks are. There's always been a reluctance to consult their general practitioner or use health information and advice. And I'll throw my hands up and say that, before what happened to me in 2017, 2012, my breakdown, I was very reluctant to go to the GP unless it was really, necessary. So I really connected with that. The other thing is sort of cultural and media issues that men often see health as a feminine issue. It's something that women, it's a woman's thing. And culturally also in terms of potentially religious and other sort of social groups where men are seen as health as not an important thing. And there's obviously this connection with healthy and beauty. And men don't tend to, beauty is not always seen as a male thing. Health and wellbeing programs in the past, and I know there's a lot of work going on to improve this, have a tendency to be female orientated, and men can all feel awkward joining up. And I remember being at a Transport for London where they had yoga groups, and in those days, it was something that you fancied doing, but you thought it was predominantly women in the group, so you were reluctant to get involved. And they used to do lunchtime things. So, there is a tendency to feel that they're female orientated by men. And this research, a lovely quote from it: males consistently fail to present in conventional healthcare settings and can be classed as both reluctant and hard to engage, as they are unlikely to experience the health enhancing interventions delivered through these channels. So there's this, what they call a reluctant and hard to engage group. And so the impact of all of this is delaying diagnosis, impairs the use of secondary healthcare, including hospitals, resulting in long-term problems and disease manifestation. So the art here is to try and get men to get engaged and look after their health early rather than later on when it's too late. Okay, move on then, please. So we're talking at a workplace forum today, and so what role has workplaces got in men's health and lifestyle? Well, they've got a really important part to play, because health is a personal responsibility, and it has a massive impact on your workplace sickness absence, and also as a duty of care. There's health and safety legislation. I know in the past there's been an emphasis more on the safety rather than the health. but more and more the legislation is weighting towards health, particularly on the emotional health side, you know, because of the risks that associate with not looking after and being proactive around healthcare. Men can and may be nervous about proactively seeking advice. We've seen that earlier, but it doesn't mean they aren't interested in finding out more. And there's ways and means of doing that, and we'll see that in a while. But men can be nervous, but it doesn't mean they're not interested. They're not avoidant of it. It's just you've got to try and engage them in good ways. Work can often be, you know, a workplace is a community setting. I appreciate in the current situation, it's not community in face-to-face, but there's still, we have sort of online meetings in a lot of cases, but there are other organisations that obviously people are still working, and that community setting makes it more comfortable for men, and they can then be exposed to the relevant messages around their healthcare and the health and well-being. So, you know, the community setting is a key point around engaging men because they're feeling more comfortable. And finally, safe and healthy workplaces are obviously beneficial to mental and physical health. And obviously the sort of schemes that Medway are doing and the workplace schemes and the awards, etc., are a great way of maintaining a safe and healthy workplace, which obviously leads on to better mental and physical health. Okay, we'll move on. So research that I've sort of looked for across this, and from my own personal experience, is things like, these are sort of tips for effective engagement. And the first one is thinking about the language you use. And it's a powerful way I've seen is using analogies that relate directly to men when talking about healthcare. So a good example, I saw a construction company who talked about boiler servicing being, you know, medical checkups are equivalent to servicing your boiler, that you need to have regular checkups. It's just like managing a boiler. So if you can use comparisons in language or examples that link to the sorts of things that your men do, that can be much more effective than using technical terms or things that you just turn them away. The other thing that was found is that men often like to get information in their own way, not necessarily be spoken to, but access it and seek it out and in their own time. So a more private way, and we'll see in some of the examples later that men were in some organisations do like to access things anonymously and do that privately. So online information is useful and use it. So and you can direct it to men. So in this world of technology and online, that's a valuable tool in engaging men. The other thing is useful is some form of humour, element of humour. So lightening the communication, lightening the messages you put out about health to men is much more effective. So making it less formal, more accessible. I don't like to use this term, but whether we like it or not, it does occur within men's workplace with men, and that's the term banter. So some form of element of humour, that banter sort of approach, it does prove effective. Engaging male employees in what they're interested in and want to know helps to build a dialogue. So some forms of focus groups or getting those employees to drive the types of initiatives you're working on helps to target those and try and target the unengaged. So by getting some of those people that are perhaps don't appear to be engaged to get involved in these focus groups, let them lead what they want to see and hear, is a really powerful way of getting them to perhaps listen more and get engaged on the health messages. And finally, if you've got some powerful male role models who can articulate the importance of the health and well-being in your organisation, normally senior people, but if they are what I would call, there are some players in the power players in an organisation, people that are respected for what they do. And if you can get those people involved in helping to put across the health and well-being message, that again is a useful way of engaging. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So there's some more tips that are useful, and use of non-health related events. So sports, hobbies or social activities connect men. So, you know, we talk about football and cars and things like that. I know that I'm stereotyping slightly there, but, you know, there are common themes. Look at what your men are interested in and what they talk about socially, and can you link the health initiatives you've got to those. And also it helps to use those to introduce a topic in a more subtle way. I know at TfL, and I'll mention later, we had a 10,000 step initiative, which you know, that was something that was a competitive. And the next point about considering how a game or a competition might help encourage more engagement. We'll see in a couple of other examples, there's powerful ways you can bring a competitive element to something that engages staff, and that 10,000 step was a good, useful one at Transport for London. Also encourage your male employees to create their own action groups. So again, we talked about the focus groups initially, and that's finding out what male employees want to talk about and get involved in their health. But the next stage is to get them to set up their own action groups and be more proactive. So from those ideas that you get in the focus group, if you listen effectively, you could get them involved in action groups, and then they can build their own communities. I know that there's sort of on the mental health side, there are groups of mental sort of groups that are being set up. And again, I'll give you an example of what happened in Transport for London around action groups, and you can see how you could develop a support community quite quickly with a predominant group of men. Also, teach at the point of communication. So men are only willing to take action at a very low level of effort and are unlikely to search for a health campaign website after seeing it advertised. You may have to go out to them. So it's actually communicating out to them rather than expecting them to go to it. Now that's just sort of a little bit opposite of what I said earlier, but this is more about, you know, big campaigns, but looking at small wins. And I'm going to draw from that an example at Pirelli, where they did some quite low effort work that actually proved effective. And finally, engaging the brain and heart. So, I mean, generally, again, I'm generalizing, men like things like facts and diagrams and visuals. You know, we talk about CCs of cars and scores at football and league tables and things like that. That's the sort of logical side of the brain that men tend to use. But if you can link them with deep-rooted masculine emotions, such that they will help to drive the long-term change. So things like pride, security, performance, love of family, these are the sorts of emotions that men tend to draw on. So if we can use those, link them with the facts, you're engaging both sides of the brain, which is, again, is quite powerful in driving the health initiatives. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Right, so now I'm going to run through some examples of workplaces that I've been into as part of my work that I saw some really effective ways of engaging with men. And the first one is Pirelli Formula One. Now, I'll explain what these people do. I went to a health and wellbeing forum. It was a workshop for the Pirelli Formula One tyre team. Now, I didn't know that every Formula One car uses the same tyre, but they've got different teams. So they are all in like a McLaren's group, a Mercedes group, etc. So they do work together in small teams, but they get together and talk about general things around Pirelli, you know, what's going on and how they look after themselves. And one of the things the men came up with is they actually came up themselves with that they did feel that they needed some form of health and wellbeing initiative. And what they decided to do was have like a round robin. It was a bit like speed dating, really. And they had 30-minute sort of sessions with different people. One session was a yoga and massage, and another one was meditation, and another one was health and safety regulations and things like that. And these guys, although they travel the world, what was coming out at my session, which is about stress, and I did the stress bucket exercise, which I think in the last presentation that was mentioned. I used the stress bucket analogy for them for a 30-minute short, sharp workshop. And what I got them to do was they all got a sheet of paper, they had the stress bucket, and they had to write in what were the things that caused them stress. It's quite interesting. The main stress for these guys was loneliness, because they're traveling around, they're in hotels, they only go into, their job is mainly to go into the pits, do the work and supply the tyres, delivering tyres, that sort of thing. And you know, although it sounds really glamorous going around the world, it's not. You know, it's a quite an isolating experience. And then when they come back, they're in a massive, great big warehouse in Oxford, where they then look at all the tyres, where they supply them, the designs, and learn about it. There's a massive technology around it, and it's a very pressurised job. So the sorts of things that were coming up was, you know, long hours, travel, time differences, all that sort of thing, you know, was coming into play. And so what I decided to do for their workshop was this 30-minute stress bucket exercise, where they write in what the stresses are and what things they use to cope. And it got them aware. And the bucket analogy, or the container analogy, is really relevant, because they obviously use buckets to clean tyres. So there was a connection there. And all these guys are, you know, manual, you know, workers, strong physical requirements to carry and transport and drive and all that sort of thing. And it really was an effective workshop, because they were doing short, sharp 30 minutes. And what we also gave them was a time to reflect and feedback on the sessions. And yeah, the stress bucket's a brilliant exercise, because what it does is allows for quick identification for self-improvement. So they were looking at what good coping strategies they were using. You know, some of them were going out for runs when they had time, you know, drinking lots of water, hydrating, all those sorts of things coming out. And then they were also made aware of the bad coping mechanisms, like, you know, alcohol, you know, drinking, not sleeping, that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it was a really valuable exercise for Pirelli, but I loved the way they did it, which was a 30-minute quick, short, sharp, then reflect. And, you know, what from what I understand, the feedback of the workshop was they wanted to do that every year. And it was, I think, because it was quick and short and sharp, because if you think about it, with the team change, the tyre changing team, that's how they work, short, sharp. So it was aligning the health and wellbeing initiative with the way they worked. And you know, it was really effective. Okay, we'll move on to the next example, please. Okay, so this one's a little bit closer to my heart, because it was when I was employed as Transport for London. And I mentioned earlier that I came back to work after being unwell, and what Transport for London were a really good listening organisation. I came back and spoke to the occupational health team there and said, look, I don't think we're supporting people well enough back to work, and I don't think managers are as educated as they could be around people returning to work or while they're off work with a mental health condition. And one of the things we agreed with occupational health was to trial and pilot a peer support group, which we actually call Wellment, and that's where the name of our company came from. And you know, Wellment was a small group where we allowed once a month for people to meet in a safe and controlled and confidential environment. And it started off very small with 2 or 3 people, and it grew. And I think now what they do is they do fortnightly meetings. They've obviously been online at the moment, but what I did notice over time was that the group was started off mainly female, and near the end of when I was leaving, because we ran it for 4 years while I was there, it was predominantly male at the end. And it was a mixed, we had a men's group, but the men's group decided after about 6 months they preferred working alongside women while we were talking in a group. So it was like a group therapy session. The occupational health team gave us guidance on how to manage those groups, but the group decided that they didn't want occupational health to be in there, because occupational health is where people get sent when they're unwell. And that's how it was seen. I'm not saying that that's the way they work, but when you're unwell and you need to be checked up on, you know, the start of a procedure for, you know, ill health redundancy or anything like that. And so there was a skepticism about it. So the group actually set it up itself and run its own rules of how it would work. It also had a closed online group. They have a system called Yammer. I know if most organisations now have got like internal sort of Facebook type setups, and Yammer was what they used, and that had over 700 people on the group. We got individuals to write blogs across the organisation, and eventually the Wellment group lobbied and got funding to start the process of having mental health first aiders in the organisation. We started with 29 people who were interviewed and measured for their emotional stability and what their motivations were to be a first aider. And that worked so successfully. I think they've now got over 250 in the organisation, and that's had a massive impact on keeping people in work and feeling emotionally supported. Now, the other thing we started to do with the Wellment Group was working with occupational health, started to look at a wellbeing champion type setup. And that we encouraged the Wellment Group to set up a team in a 10,000 step challenge. So across TfL, the organisation had what they called a global step challenge. We were competing with other organisations across the world, and groups of 7 or 8 people did a step challenge. So who could do the most steps over a period of time? And they did league tables each week, and there was a very competitive element to it. Now, if you remember going back to the slide that we saw earlier, having that competitive element was it really engaged a lot of men. And I think the profile they did of the 10,000 step challenge at TfL identified that there was about 75% men, or 75% men involved, engaged in it. 75% of the total contestants in the 10,000 step challenge were male. We also did a lot of work with them on stress awareness, because stress is the start of more serious mental health conditions if it's not managed and people are not aware of it. And that was really powerfully received. And we did target them particularly across all parts of the organisation, but particularly where there was a significant number of males. A lot of evening workers, night workers, engineers on the lines, customer service officers, etc., were engaged. And what we found, it was important to measure the uptake of what these initiatives were really doing in the organisation. And what we found is the employee assistance programme usage, there was a significant rise for males. So the employee assistance programme at TfL at the time was providing counselling support as well as advice and support on things like financial issues, domestic problems, etc. And during the period of time when Wellment started to when I left, the rise in males using that service had grown significantly. And we think that these initiatives around engaging more directly with male had a massive impact on that. So what this means is men are reaching out for support and help. So some advice maybe, if you've got an employee assistance program, look at the male take-up, and see with the initiatives you use, there could be a correlation between those initiatives and an increase in male usage of your EAP services. And that's a positive sign. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is a great little organisation that I went to in Sheffield. Now, Sheffield, for those who know Sheffield, it was originally a massive steel making and steelworks city. People who've got really good stainless steel cutlery would know that most of the best comes from Sheffield. So a very proud industrial city indeed. And Split the Bills was an organisation set up by a guy who was a student at university, and he saw that there was a gap in the market for when students share accommodation. There's always a battle over who pays what in terms of internet usage, electricity, power, light and gas, etc., power, light and heat, etc. And so he set up a company that helped to split bills, but also for students to find the best deal around, they're getting the best deal in terms of their utilities and internet, etc. And it's a very successful organisation. And I was asked by Time to Change to go up to Sheffield and to get them to help them beyond the Time to Change pledge with developing a group of champions. And so I went up to there and did a training session, and it was probably the first organisation where the majority of the champions were men. And it really struck me quite, I've been probably, in my time at Time to Change, I've probably been to around 30 or 40 organisations across the country. And, there's only this organisation and a couple of others where there was predominantly men. In fact, I'd go to some organisations and there'd only be one man to every, we normally did groups of 15 and there'd be 14 ladies and one man as a champion. So, you know, this group, something was going on here, and Nadine Warburton, who was the HR lady there, and then she's gone on to better things because she worked with the Prince William and on his working group for workplace mental health at work website. So I knew that she was doing something special, and I you know, afterwards I had a chat with her about this and said, look, you're the first group where I've seen most men, and straight away I said, why is this? She said, well, we split the bills is primarily like a call center, really, and there's a lot of cold calling goes on. And cold calling, when you get rejected, she was saying that the majority of their sickness rate came from the male people in the call center, although there was like a 50-50 split male-female call center employees. She was finding the majority of the sickness rates was from men. So she got a men's group together, focus group, and said, look, you know, I'm really worried about, I'm really concerned that it seems to be the things that are going on for you are really affecting you, you know, the men, and you know, what can we do about it? And the group decided that what she said was, look, I'm giving you an open, we've got a budget of X amount. What do you feel will be useful? And one of the chaps there said, well, look, we'd like our own group, but one of the things we really would like is somewhere where we can let off steam, because we don't want to do it in front of anyone, but sometimes we get some really horrendous insults through on our call center, and we don't know what to do with it. And so two things came up. They wanted somewhere for a release, and what they did was they at the time, the Wii, I think it was the Wii, Nintendo Wii was a big thing, and she put a screen in a room, and then they could go and do the 10-pin bowling, was a popular one, where it's got about 100 skittles, and you basically bowl and battle all these, not all these skittles down, and it was felt as a release, and then they wanted that, she put that in. But the other thing that I was really impressed with was a thing called the Head Shed, and she took me in there, and there's a little room. I mean, where they work is an old converted factory. Actually, it's quite a nice setting, but they've got all these little small rooms. Presumably they were like machine rooms or something. And this room was kitted out with like books with motivational phrases in it. She always every morning sort of put some incense in it to calm the environment down, and it had a seat and headphones, which they could, and an iPod, where they could play music. And what this again was the male group that came up with this idea. And the Head Shed was where, if you got a bad call or you just wanted to, and you know, you wanted to release it, it had a little sign with on it engaged or vacant, and they could go in and use it for so long. And the main owner of the Split the Bills was very supportive of these initiatives. The other sorts of things they did was competitions. They did plenty of quizzes around health and physical activities like rounders, events for the groups, and you know, that sort of thing, she said, was really, really valuable. And finally, what she wanted to do was she wanted to focus on, if they were going to have mental health first aid, then they would focus on men. And so the men got priority over the first aid places initially because of that health, you know, the factor. And a lot of the reason for their absences were primarily deep down, when they delved into it, was emotional, you know, stress related conditions, even though sometimes it was said it was colds or something like that. Actually, when they asked deeper, it was, you know, more to do with the work, stress of the work. And so a really, really good organised, progressive organisation in a call centre environment. Okay, and the last, before I go on to the last case study, I wanted to just make you aware, and there's a link, and there will be information given out at the end in the link with this very recent paper from the Samaritans, which is about engaging men earlier and a guide to designing service. That came out in January of this year. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this brings together some of the points we've already talked about. And I'll show you how I put these sorts of things into practice. But the key points from this study is that a successful wellbeing initiative should use activities to facilitate conversations. So if we go back, you can see that there's been some activities there that help people to start conversations, to be welcoming and accessible. So men just want to be welcomed, and what they can access is readily available. Have a sense of a reverence. So this is the humour factor again, that humour can be really, really powerful. If things are not taken too seriously, even though they may be serious, they can be a good draw in for people to start talking more seriously about, you know, what their health is and how they can look after it. Start with a very low commitment and then increase it. If you start high and try and get men to do things, you know, lots in one go, then you're very unlikely you'll get a high dropout rate. But if you give them a small commitment to start with, it's likely to increase as you go along, and their loyalty is with it, with what you're trying to do. Communicate clearly. I think obviously that's a general one, but you know, making sure that your communication lines are clear. And remember, we said earlier about trying to link your communication with male-related examples or analogies. Foster meaningful relationships over time. So you will build role models. You will build people who could push your initiatives, you know, and engage with men if you foster them and nurture them over a period of time. They're not going to happen straight away. And finally, foster a sense of achievement. So this is about, there normally has to be an output for men in terms of a wellbeing initiative. So the 10,000 step example we gave, for men, it was like trying to be top of the league in doing the most steps in that week or overall. So there's always got to be some form of sense of achievement. Okay, now, if you bear those sort of points in mind, if we go to the next slide, Helen, I worked, as you know, I mentioned earlier, I worked for Time to Change. And one of the things that I've been running over the last 2 years is an organisation called Men, Music and Mental Health. So it's a group that meets monthly, and totally following, and this was pre the paper, so it's really good to see the Samaritans paper and see that sort of things I've been doing with this group had actually what they were saying, I'd sort of near enough ticked most of those points. So the Men, Music and Mental Health group started as a small group in a coffee shop in Hoxton in London, and where it came about was that I was invited to a podcast by Time to Change in Wardour Street in London. Time to Change do podcasts with various champions talking about what they've been doing and you know, where initiatives have been quite successful. And I got invited along to a podcast to talk about my peer support group at TfL. And I met at that podcast the London coordinator for Time to Change, and she heard what I was doing, and I'd mentioned about a lot of men coming to our group, and she said, Steve, I'm really struggling with getting champions in London in the community to engage. You know, we've only got like a 5 to 6% champions take up that are male compared to female. And she said, I'm really struggling what to do. And 2 days earlier, I'd been in a record shop, a vinyl record shop, talking to the owner, and he said to me, I said, how's it going? How's the business? He said, well, I get lots of people coming in and they're mainly men. And he said, so I don't really feel like I'm a shop seller. I'm more like a therapist. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, when they're flicking through the records, you know, they remember, oh, this song was my first girlfriend. And, you know, I remember England won the World Cup when this one, and this sort of thing was going on. And a sort of a little light bulb moment came into my head. And I said to Christala, who's the London coordinator, look, why don't you set up a Men, Music and Mental Health group, because music's something that men are always interested in. And there was another champion there, and she said, yeah, we had a vinyl store at one of our events, and it was just, there was men all the way around it, you know. So straight away we put two and together, and she gave me funding to set this group up, so you know, just to pay for teas and coffees to get men together. And you know, it started as a group of 15, it's still going, and initially, it was just talking about music, but then we got musicians coming along. We got a guy who's like a promoter for gigs and things like that. So, you know, all of a sudden we worked alongside Musicians UK, who was a charity for them, and we got together. We were talking about, you know, music generally, record sleeves, different. We then developed a playlist on Spotify, and we got a playlist on Spotify with songs that are normally around a theme. And normally there are themes around emotions. So we get men to talk. We have check-ins at the start to see how we're all doing. And eventually, and then talking about having some form of achievement, one of the members of the group, Neil Avery, is very friendly with a guy called Nigel Planer. And now Nigel Planer was Neil in The Young Ones. I don't know if anyone remembers that comedy, but so Neil and Nigel got together, and the group helped with developing a song called Talk It Out. And that song is available on this web link, and you can download that in your workplace. And it's to try and encourage men to talk it out. It's a bit like a Smithsy type sort of song. And on that website, there's more of the story around men, music and mental health, and how that helped Neil to develop this song. I mean, we had input into what we heard the words, we heard a demo, and the group identified it probably needed a choir in it. And so we got a choir, and then one of the group knew someone who did videos, and we videoed it in Alexander Palace. And that was all from a small group in a coffee shop, which, you know, started with 4 guys, and they come along. And now we meet every month. Obviously with lockdown, it's been on Zoom, and we wanted to do a gig before lockdown, and hope that's still an aspiration with people of the group and other people we know. Interestingly, it's now called Me Music and Mental Health, because the men felt that, you know, we wanted women, and women wanted to get involved in it. So we've encouraged it, and we changed the name since April, since Time to Change finished. And now it's Me Music and Mental Health. And I think it's a healthier for that. But it was certainly started as a men only, a male, you know, predominant group. But really a success story from my point of view. And please do download the single, download it and use it, because Neil wants that to happen. That was what the group's about, having some form of outcome, because men like inputs and outputs. And on that sort of positive note, I'd like to end. That's the end of my sort of presentation, but I know that Justine's got some signposting that might be valuable around men. And if you've got any questions or anything else, any observations, then please do use the chat. That's really important. We'll have a Q&A at the end. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Steve. That was brilliant. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that that was really informative and interesting. There's a few slides that I'd like to share with you for local and national mental health support services. There's quite a few slides with quite a lot of information on, so I won't detail every single thing because that would take up too much time. And I know we're running out of time now. So I'll just go through a few things. If you do want a copy of the slides, then please do let us know. And if you could... Sorry, I didn't realise I'm muted. I just wanted to say thank you very much, Steve, for that informative talk. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that it was really fascinating. Just to follow on what Steve was talking about, I'd just like to share some signposting slides on local and national mental health support services. There's a lot of information on about 4 slides, so as we're running out of time, especially as I was talking on mute for about 5 minutes, I'll just run through them quickly. But if you do want a copy of the slides, then please do let us know. There's if you register your interest on the feedback form, we can send you a copy of the slides. So for Kent and Medway, there's quite a few here, but there's Release the Pressure. That's a free confidential service. So if you're finding yourself in distress, you can get immediate support from trained staff 24 hours a day. All you need to do is just text Kent or Medway, dependent on where you live. There's also the Safe Havens. They're run by Mental Health Matters. They look after the Canterbury, Maidstone, Medway and Thanet Safe Havens, and Hestia looks after the Folkestone Safe Havens. So you can ring them up, or they have an open door policy. You can just walk in if you need them. Single point of access, that's if you're known to KMPT or you're in distress. So different telephone numbers there, dependent on your age. And the Kent and Medway NHS talking therapies, they're confidential, free treatments delivered by trained staff. who can talk you through. You can refer yourself or get your GP to do it. There's the Better Health Every Mind Matters. You can get yourself a free personalised NHS approved mind plan by answering a few simple questions. And there's Live Well Kent to Medway. So if you find that your mental health is impacting your life, work, money, housing or relationships, they're there to help you. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Helen. So these are some separate services for Medway and for Kent. Better Connected, that's for people who are aged 65, so the support for if they're feeling socially isolated, and it helps them to access local activities with a 12-week support programme. Better Medway Together helps also to tackle social isolation. Men in Sheds, that is quite good because it brings together unemployed or retired men aged 25 plus to share their skills and try out new hobbies in a safe environment where they can talk and discuss any problems with each other. Time to Change hubs, that's for people that have lived experience of mental health illness, and they can share their experiences with people. Community Navigators in Kent is for people who are lonely and isolated, and is for people aged 55 and over or with complex health problems. Next slide, please, Helen. So we've got the National Mental Health Support Services here. So there's a lot here. Samaritans, that's 24/7 confidential, immediate help if you've got a crisis, or it's also to prevent crises. Campaign Against Living Miserably, or otherwise known as CALM, is a movement against suicide. There's also the Stay Alive Safety Planning app. That's a suicide prevention resource to help you stay safe. You can use it if you have suicidal thoughts or if you know of somebody that does. And then there's also Able Futures lower down at the bottom. They help you to learn ways to cope better with your mental health challenges actually in the workplace. So if you go to the next slide, please, Helen. So then you also have your NHS support services. So we're not just talking about mental health, we're also talking about your general health. So if you're aged between 40 and 74 years of age, you can go and have a free health check. It just looks out for signs of stroke, kidney disease, diabetes or dementia. There's also the NHS weight loss plan. That's a 12-week guide to help you lose weight with diet and exercise tips. And the One You helps you to make better choices and become healthy with lots of tips as well. And the 5 ways to wellbeing. Evidence suggests that there's 5 steps to improve your mental health and your wellbeing, such as connecting with others, being active, learning new skills, giving to others, and mindfulness. So if you click on that link, that can give you more help. So that's all for me. I'll pass over to Helen now. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Justin. A lot of good support groups there for people to access. So just before we go into questions and answers, I thought I'd take this opportunity to discuss the Kent and Medway Healthy Workplaces programme. I appreciate some of you have already joined the scheme and working towards your awards, which is absolutely great. So I'll briefly do an overview. So if more companies like to join, that's brilliant. So the background, it's commissioned by KCC and Medway Council and endorsed by Public Health England. It's completely free support for all businesses of all sizes and all sectors. So we're here to really identify the needs and gaps, looking at staff, maybe sickness, staff turnover. We provide a free survey that people can access to identify this. So we ensure businesses have the basics in place to develop a healthy workplace, and we support employees in making pledges that meet the needs of their business and staff. So there are 4 stages: bronze, silver, gold and platinum. This is just an example of a timeline, but nothing's set in stone, so it's up to the individual business. So basically the bronze is 10 pledges, and we look at the building blocks here. We look at what policies you have, what policies you might need. We look at senior sign on to the programme. We look at maybe, have you got the relevant health and safety training for your staff? We look at your accident book, whether there's a policy there in place. Then the silver and gold, and this is where it becomes quite creative. And we asked 15 pledges in each, and you can select from over 80 pledges. And within that, we have 8 themes. So it could be anything from mental health and well-being and stress to healthy lifestyles, physical activity. We look at alcohol and drug misuse, look at stop smoking and such like that. And then under the platinum, this is where we go beyond your business. So we look at the wider community, look at the people that you work with, look at your supply chain maybe, so we can help others around you. So the other things that we can do and how we can support you, we can offer you free places on mental health first aid training, and also Connect 5, which, as it says here, normally would cost £350 per person. We look at workplace health champion training for staff, and we also give staff access to our workshops that we regularly hold on maybe healthy eating, sleep, or any topic at the time. So then, as I mentioned before, with the building blocks, we can actually give guidance on developing these policies if we don't have policies in place for like smoke-free and alcohol, stress and well-being. We also allow you to have an access to the members side of the programme, where you can actually look at other resources in there. We're also developing a directory now, so that you can maybe produce your logo so that people can see that you're committed to health and well-being, and it's just a healthy promotion there. And then also you receive regular newsletters with current events that's going on. The other services we provide is the Stop Smoking support group. We also, I think Justine touched on it, we provide health checks. So the NHS, we're now starting to do that again, of staff between 40 and 70, and we can go into the workplace and we can look at groups of people. So we can look at all your health needs and diabetes and take your blood pressure and such like that. We also look at physical activities. We connect with Kent Sport and also One You Kent programme. Also, I don't know if you're aware of now, we're doing Step Into the Summer, where we're looking at all our businesses can actually participate in this. And I understand it's going quite well, and it looks like we're going to hit our target there. So I think that's been extended now for a couple of weeks, so probably till mid-July now. But yeah, that's been quite successful there. Later on, we'll be offering our health kiosks, which we'll take to different various sites where you can have this kiosk for a number of weeks, so you can look at your BMI and look at your weight in your own, in your own private area. And then obviously wellbeing days, we can actually help you with bespoke wellbeing days to get your team active and motivated and working together. So next steps, how do we do this? So it's easy as just going onto our website, looking at the programme there. To register, which literally takes 2 seconds, we're only asking for basic information at this stage. Then a coordinator like myself would contact you depending on our area, because there's 4 of us working in separate areas within Kent. And then we can look at where you like to go with it, what's your aims, your challenges, your ambitions, and help you set a bespoke health and wellbeing programme, and then start you on your bronze, because obviously the bronze is the first stage. So, yeah, that is a brief overview of our programme. So which leads me on to any questions and answers you may have for Steve or us or the programme, such like that.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. So I haven't noticed any questions in the chat. I'm just having a look through now. I don't know if you've noted down any at all, Justine. Got some great suggestions, probably some things for us to take forward as a team, and perhaps developing some stress bucket props that companies could use in their toolbox talks. And I've jotted down loads of notes about ways we can probably do more things with male-dominated workplaces and sort of toolbox talks and gamification. It's just a word you get bandied about quite a lot. So making things into games and that element of competition. As Helen mentioned, we are running our Step Into Summer challenge, which is a physical activity challenge running throughout June, and that has generated a bit of competition within individual teams and workplaces, but also across between businesses, which is really positive. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Steve or the wider team? Do feel free to unmute if there was anything you wanted to ask. I'm just conscious that we've more or less run out of time, but we are happy to hang on if there are questions. Jamie's asked, do you work with anyone who can perhaps help with equipment for a work type sports day type of thing? I don't know whereabouts you're based in Kent, Jamie, but that's certainly something we can look into. And we do have some community groups that can support those types of initiatives. And Kent Sport have a workplace health coordinator who works with workplaces around stuff like sports days. If you could email workplacehealth@medway.gov.uk, we can link you up with some people that can help you with that. Other questions at all? We'll take silence as golden, I think. If there's no further questions, if you wanted to page on to the next slide, Helen. But it's really for us just to say thank you. A huge thank you to Steve for sharing all those excellent tips and those case studies. I think it's really valuable to hear about real life workplaces and what people have actually done, rather than us as the sort of workplace officers just suggesting things to you. You can actually hear about what other people have done and the impact that had in their workplace. Please do fill in the feedback form for us. It's a link there where you can scan the QR code on the screen. It's really helpful to us to know what you do and don't find useful in these sessions, so we can tweak them and develop them. And obviously, if you do fill in the form, we can get your email and make sure you get a copy of the slides. I'm happy to hang around for a little while if anyone has got further questions or things they wanted to discuss, but otherwise you're more than free to go and enjoy the rest of your day.